Welcome back to Ben's Book Club. Today we're diving into the book Courage is Calling. Fortune Favors the Brave. We are going to unpack the brilliant insights from Ryan Holiday's opening volume in his series on the 4 classical Stoic virtues. We're looking at a concept that has absolutely shaped history, defined great leaders, and yet it is so deeply relevant to the very ordinary, everyday choices you and I make.
So, I want you to think for a second. What is a decision you knew you had to make, but you delayed it because you were just waiting for the fear to disappear first? Maybe it was a huge career move, a really difficult conversation, or even launching a creative project. We love to tell ourselves that we're just being careful, gathering more information, waiting for that perfect moment that mysteriously never seems to arrive. But let's be real for a minute. Is saying I'm just being careful sometimes just a socially acceptable way of saying I'm terrified? This explainer really challenges us to recognize that what we often disguise as caution is actually just fear holding us back from taking agency in our own lives.
This book completely redefines how we typically view bravery. It asks us to stop looking at courage as this super rare genetic personality trait reserved only for battlefield heroes or famous public figures. Instead, courage is a highly practical, repeatable choice. It's the everyday decision to just move forward, to do what is right, needed, or true, even when you are actively afraid. The fear doesn't magically vanish. The brave are simply the ones who decide that something else is way more important than their fear.
Ryan Holiday makes a massive claim here. He argues that courage is the absolute prerequisite for all other classical virtues. In the Stoic tradition, there are 4 cardinal virtues, right? Courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. But the core argument is that without courage, the other 3 simply do not matter. Because a belief only matters if you actually put it into practice. Without courage, your wisdom just stays this theoretical idea floating around in your head. Your sense of justice stays entirely silent when it actually counts. And your temperance, your self-discipline, remains totally untested by the pressures of the real world. Courage is literally the backbone of it all.
Now, what's really fascinating is this distinction between an involuntary reaction and a chosen state. The author points out that fear is perfectly normal. It operates exactly like a smoke alarm. It gives you immediate information and flags potential danger. But while being scared is an involuntary temporary physical reaction to that alarm, being afraid is a chosen, paralyzing state of mind. Letting fear act as this terrible commander that governs your choices, that is entirely optional. We have to learn to assess the fear rather than just automatically obeying it.
To help with that, the book lays out a very clear framework for disarming this fear using pure logic. Fear absolutely thrives on vagueness and the unknown. It inflates obstacles. It's just like a monster in a horror movie, right? It's far scarier before it's fully revealed in the light. Our fears grow exponentially when they stay undefined. So to defeat them, we have to identify the specific threat, break it down into concrete parts, and realistically count the outcomes. You literally have to ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of? Examining threats rationally, piece by piece, strips away their overwhelming power.
To illustrate this, there's this incredible anecdote about Ulysses S. Grant. Long before he was a famous general, he was walking through the woods and heard what sounded like a massive, absolutely terrifying pack of wolves howling nearby. The noise was deafening, but when the threat was actually located and counted, it turned out to be just 2 animals. 2 wolves echoing off the landscape to sound like a literal army. The lesson here is so profound. Most fears shrink significantly once they are accurately counted and brought out of the fog of our imagination.
But of course, not all fear is about physical danger, like wolves in the woods. Often, the real enemy is purely social. Think about Florence Nightingale for a moment. She knew her calling was to nurse the sick and pioneer modern medicine. Yet, she delayed answering that call for 16 whole years. Why? Because she feared the harsh disapproval of her aristocratic family. The gap between sensing what you should do and actually doing it is almost always fear. It's the fear of looking foolish, the fear of rejection, or the fear of stepping out of line. And this brings us to a pretty devastating reality. The opposite of courage isn't fear. The opposite of courage is apathy, inaction, and despair. When we let that fear of judgment win, the hidden costs are absolutely massive. We end up with deferred dreams, unchallenged injustices in our workplaces, unexamined relationships, and ultimately a life lived entirely by someone else's expectations. In group settings, this silence might look like harmony, but let's face it, it's often just complicity. Inaction quietly drains our lives of meaning and purpose.
So the crucial takeaway here is that waiting to feel completely ready or waiting for permission is just a really elegant form of avoidance. Courage is agency in action. The world is watching to see whether you're going to step into the arena or just stay comfortable on the sidelines. You don't get agency by waiting for someone to hand it to you. You claim it through decisive, principled action, even when the outcome is completely uncertain.
Which leaves us with a very direct challenge. If not you, then who? The book emphasizes that responsibility almost always lands on the person who is simply willing to take a step. When there is a problem at work or a difficult dynamic in your family, it is just so easy to assume someone else is going to handle it. But if everyone assumes that, nothing changes. The courageous individual looks at the messy situation and realizes that if they don't step up, absolutely nobody will.
And stepping up doesn't have to mean leading an army into battle. Building your courage muscle starts with tiny, daily decisions, not grand, heroic gestures. It's all about everyday courage. It's making that difficult phone call you've been putting off for weeks. It's having the security to just say, "I don't know," in a big meeting. It's setting a personal boundary, admitting a mistake, or giving difficult feedback. The author argues that courage is cumulative. You practice it daily, the exact same way an athlete practices free throws in an empty gym, so that when a larger, game-winning crisis arrives, the muscle is already developed and ready to go.
This brings up a fascinating distinction between battlefield bravery and moral courage. Battlefield bravery is what we typically picture, facing literal physical danger. But moral courage is standing up for the truth socially, politically, or professionally, often at an enormous cost to your own belonging or status. Holiday insists that these two domains actually use the exact same internal muscle, but require putting yourself on the line, acting despite uncertainty, and fully accepting the consequences of your actions.
There is a brilliant illustration of moral courage in action detailed in the book. Think of NYPD detective Frank Serpico. He exposed systemic police corruption right inside his own department. He did this at immense personal risk, not just to his career, but to his actual life. He was ostracized by the very people he worked alongside every day. Whistleblowers like Serpico refuse to just go along with the crowd when truth and justice are at stake. It's such a powerful reminder that sometimes the absolute bravest thing you can do is refuse to conform.
But we also have to ask a vital question here. When does courage cross the line and just become reckless? If courage is a virtue, we really need to draw a firm line between considered risk and ego-driven performance. The book is extremely clear that a meaningful life requires principled action, not constant thrill-seeking contrarianism just for the sake of causing a scene. Public grandstanding without good judgment isn't bravery. It's just a totally different kind of foolishness.
This is where the other Stoic virtues come rushing back into play. True bravery requires preparation and purpose. Preparation creates courage, and competence shrinks fear. Bold is not rash. When you're prepared, you aren't just blindly jumping off a cliff. You are taking a highly calculated leap. Courage doesn't necessarily require this innate, bubbling confidence. Rather, true confidence usually follows courageous action and rigorous preparation.
Ultimately, all of this builds into the absolute highest form of bravery, which the book calls the heroic. At a certain point, courage stops being just about your own self-development or pursuing your own personal calling. It elevates into a profound duty to protect or elevate others. Heroism is courage directed outward, heavily characterized by selflessness. It is risking your own comfort, status, or safety for something far larger than yourself, perhaps for people who will never even know what you did for them. We see this vividly in the historical example of Charles de Gaulle. Back in 1940, he stood virtually alone in exile in London. When everyone else around him surrendered to the immense, crushing pressure of defeat during World War II, he flat out refused to accept it. He risked absolutely everything, his reputation, his life, his family's future, just to rally the French resistance from afar, until he could finally return to a liberated France years later. This wasn't about his own comfort. It was a completely selfless stand for a cause much larger than himself, demonstrating the absolute pinnacle of moral resistance.
Which leads to Holliday's most profound conclusion in the entire book. The true opposite of fear is love. Heroism isn't ultimately driven by just wanting to be tough or stoic or fearless. It's driven by love. Love of other people, love of justice, and a deep, abiding love for the greater good. When you care about a principle or a person more than you care about your own safety or your own social standing, that love is what pushes you right through the fear.
So the tools to act are already right there in your hands. You can break your fears down. You can start with small, everyday acts of bravery, and you can prepare yourself to stand up for what truly matters. The world is watching to see if you will step into the arena. Courage is calling. Will you answer? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.